What if the key to success isn't talent or preparation, but an unshakable belief in yourself? Imagine walking into a room radiating certainty so powerful that the world bends to your will not because you're right, but because you refuse to be ignored. Can you embody that level of belief? Let's explore the unsettling power of delusional self-confidence, a tool that has turned ordinary individuals into world-changing forces. We live in a world that prizes logic, evidence, and rationality. However, behind the closed doors of power and influence, a dangerous truth lurks: perception trumps reality. Niccolo Machiavelli, a philosopher often seen as a master of manipulation, understood this principle better than anyone. For him, the world wasn't moved by reason, but by how one is perceived. In the modern era, this truth is more relevant than ever. We see it in the rise of influencers, politicians, and leaders, people who may not have the best arguments or qualifications, but seem invincible simply because they carry themselves with an overwhelming sense of certainty. But what happens when this confidence isn't based on objective reality? What happens when it's not a calculated performance but a delusion? The concept of delusional self-confidence is exactly that, a belief so firm, so unwavering that it bends the universe around you. It's the kind of belief that fuels tyrants, entrepreneurs, and revolutionaries. It's the belief that transforms an ordinary individual into an unstoppable force. Machiavelli himself was no stranger to this type of power. He didn't just wield influence through strategy, he mastered the art of appearing invincible. And in doing so, he demonstrated that the world doesn't reward righteousness. It rewards those who act as though they already have the power they seek. This is where delusional self-confidence begins to take shape. It's not about pretending to be something you're not. It's about making your inner emptiness a wellspring of unshakable conviction. It's about stepping into a room and declaring, "I am the king," before the kingdom has been built. It's about walking as though you're already a legend long before anyone even knows your name. And when you do this, when you live as if you're already on the throne, something powerful happens. The world doesn't challenge you, it begins to bend to your will. This kind of belief doesn't require logic. It requires discipline, audacity, and a relentless commitment to your own vision. When you summon it, reality itself starts to shift. Not because the universe owes you anything, but because you have become impossible to ignore. Just think about those who've changed the course of history. Alexander the Great, at just 20 years old, declared himself the son of Zeus, not as a metaphor, but as a truth. When he believed it, others believed it too. It wasn't his bloodline, his military strategy, or his divine right that gave him power. It was the certainty with which he carried himself. The world follows the delusional because they're impossible to ignore. They act as if victory is inevitable even before the battle begins. The key to this type of influence isn't in convincing others with logic or facts. It's in convincing yourself first. Once you've done that, your certainty becomes contagious, and others will follow not because they believe in your truth, but because they see you as someone who is destined for greatness. This power isn't about the clarity of your argument, it's about the strength of your conviction. And that, perhaps, is the greatest lesson we can learn from Machiavelli. It's not the facts that win people over, it's the illusion of certainty. This concept, though radical, is not as foreign as it might seem. We see it all around us in every field: politics, business, entertainment. People with less talent or fewer resources than their competitors often rise to the top, not because they were the best prepared, but because they acted with relentless confidence even in the face of overwhelming odds. Think about some of the most controversial leaders in history. They weren't necessarily the most capable. What they had was a belief in themselves that's so deep that it overshadowed everything else. It was this conviction that allowed them to change the course of history. The power of self-confidence in these individuals isn't just about personal belief, it's about creating a narrative. People follow the narrative, not the truth. Look at how movements and ideologies are born. They start with a few individuals who have a vision so clear, so compelling, that they can convince others to follow them, even if that vision defies logic. The key here is not to be right, it's to be convincing. It's to embody the role of a leader even when you don't yet have the power or the resources to back it up. Machiavelli understood this well. He wrote about virtue, a concept that is often misunderstood. It isn't about being morally virtuous. It's about having the ability to shape one's destiny. It's about understanding that the world is full of uncertainty and chaos, but instead of being crippled by it, you use it to your advantage. Leaders with delusional self-confidence don't wait for the world to recognize their worth. They create their own worth. And in doing so, they force the world to take notice. And this is where the paradox arises. To be truly successful in the Machiavellian sense, you must act as though you've already succeeded. The perception you create about yourself is more important than the reality. Your certainty in your own abilities, your unyielding belief that you are destined for greatness becomes the engine that drives your success. The more you act like a winner, the more others will start to see you as one. It's a cycle that feeds on itself. When others see you acting like a leader, they start to follow, and their belief in you becomes self-fulfilling. In the world of power, there is no room for doubt. The moment you hesitate, the moment you show uncertainty, you lose. And that's why delusional self-confidence is so dangerous. It demands unwavering belief in the face of any obstacle. It doesn't just allow you to take risks, it forces you to act as if failure is not an option. This kind of self-confidence doesn't just impact your success, it shapes your very identity. Over time, the persona you create becomes indistinguishable from who you actually are. The line between self-perception and reality blurs, and you start to embody the very myth you've built. This transformation is not just psychological, it's existential. The person you were before becomes irrelevant. What matters is the version of you that others see, the version that is impossible to ignore. The true power of delusional self-confidence lies not in the external world, but in the internal world. To have this kind of unwavering belief, you must first build a fortress inside yourself. This is where the real work begins: the discipline, the isolation, the sacrifice. In a world that constantly tests our limits, the most difficult challenge is not the external forces we face, but the internal forces that seek to destroy our self-belief. The mind can be a harsh critic, and overcoming it is where true strength is forged. Machiavelli's teachings on the nature of power are deeply rooted in this internal struggle. He understood that the greatest obstacle to achieving greatness was not the competition, but the self-doubt that all humans inevitably face. And the only way to rise above that doubt is to develop a psychological resilience so strong that it becomes impossible to question your own worth. This resilience, however, doesn't come naturally. It must be cultivated through discipline and practice. To cultivate this internal strength, one must first recognize that the battle is within. It is easy to get distracted by the external world, to focus on the opinions of others, or to fall into the trap of comparing oneself to those who appear to have more power or success. But in truth, it is the internal narrative that shapes who you become. If you can learn to control your internal dialogue, to refuse to let self-doubt dictate your actions, you gain an incredible advantage over others who are constantly battling their own insecurities. This is where the concept of control of the narrative comes into play. If you control how you perceive yourself, you control how others perceive you. This isn't about deception. It's about creating a version of yourself that is so compelling that it forces the world to accept it. The key to this is to stop thinking of yourself as a passive participant in your own life. You must become the architect of your identity, designing and projecting the person you need to be to achieve your goals. The true power of delusional self-confidence is that it creates a feedback loop. The more you act with confidence, the more you begin to believe in your own narrative. The more you believe in your narrative, the more others will start to accept it as truth. And the more they accept it, the more real it becomes. This is the dangerous magic of self-belief. It doesn't just influence others. It transforms you into the person you always aspired to be. However, it's important to understand that this process isn't easy. It's a constant battle against the voice of doubt that resides in all of us. But once you understand that your reality is shaped by your beliefs, you begin to see the world in a new light. You realize that the only limitations that exist are the ones you impose on yourself. At this point, the question must be asked, what happens when you become consumed by this belief? When your delusional self-confidence stops being a tool for success and transforms into an identity so deeply ingrained that you can no longer distinguish between who you are and who you need to be. This is where delusional self-confidence crosses into a dangerous territory, one where the line between the myth and the reality becomes blurred beyond recognition. Machiavelli, in his understanding of power, warned of the perils of losing control over one's own narrative. He knew that once an individual begins to live as if they are invincible, they are no longer governed by the limitations of ordinary life. They start to believe in their own myth. This transformation can be empowering, but it can also be isolating and perilous. For those who embody their delusions to the point of complete identification with them, the stakes grow higher. There is no retreat, no fallback. There is only the constant, relentless pursuit of self-actualization and a refusal to accept anything less than absolute control over your environment and your destiny. What happens when the person you pretend to be becomes the person you truly are? It's not that you lose your authenticity, rather you transcend the need for authenticity. The concept of authenticity itself becomes a prison. You stop measuring your worth by external validation and instead measure it by the strength of your internal belief. You start to operate on a different level altogether, one where your confidence is so total, so undeniable, that it becomes almost self-sustaining. This is when the danger becomes clear. Those who are consumed by their own delusions of grandeur are not necessarily unqualified to lead. In fact, many of them are incredibly capable. The issue lies not in their ability, but in their inability to accept any form of failure. To admit that you are wrong to show vulnerability or weakness is to risk shattering the illusion that you've worked so hard to build. This fear of losing the myth of being exposed as less than perfect is what keeps delusional self-confidence in place, even when it may be to the detriment of the individual. But it doesn't end there. The paradox is that the more you immerse yourself in the myth, the more it demands from you. The myth becomes a form of self-imposed tyranny. You are no longer just acting as though you are a king. You begin to expect the world to treat you as one. And when the world doesn't immediately bow to your will, you risk losing everything. The more you identify with your myth, the more fragile it becomes, because the moment the world challenges it, you have nothing to fall back on but the narrative you've built. But despite the risks, this is also where the greatest power lies. When the myth has taken root deeply enough, it ceases to be a facade. It becomes the driving force behind your actions, and everything you do radiates the certainty of someone who knows exactly who they are and where they are going. People are drawn to this energy, this certainty. They follow not because they have been convinced by your argument, but because they sense that you cannot be ignored. As we arrive at the final realization, the essence of delusional self-confidence is clear. It is not about living a lie, it is about living as if your greatest potential is already a reality. It's the art of creating a self so compelling, so unwavering, that not even the harshest external circumstances can shake it. This force, once fully embodied, becomes invincible not because of inherent power, but because of the refusal to accept anything less than success. The world doesn't reward those who are merely talented or qualified. It rewards those who carry themselves as though they have already succeeded. Confidence, when pushed to its limits, becomes a weapon. It doesn't just influence, it shapes reality itself. It's the force that drives history forward, from kings to revolutionaries to modern-day leaders. The ones who succeed are the ones who dare to believe in themselves so fully that the world has no choice but to follow. But the question remains, will you embrace this power? Will you become the myth that shapes your own destiny, or will you allow doubt to control your actions? The choice is yours. And in that choice lies the true power of delusional self-confidence.